I always believed neighborhoods were supposed to feel safe, a place where you knew the faces around you and trusted the people living just over the fence. But that belief shattered the morning. I found an unexpected notice taped to my front door, stamped with the HOA's logo like a warning sign. The accusations inside didn't make sense, and the hostility that followed made even less. Overnight, familiar smiles turned into cold stares. People I'd greeted for years suddenly avoided eye contact. And just when I thought the situation couldn't get any worse, something happened that changed everything. Because whatever this dispute was about, it had become personal. And I still didn't know who started it. Or why. Drop your location and comment. Let's see how far this story reaches around the world. My name is Daniel. I moved into Brookside Meadows with my wife, Emily, and our 10-year-old daughter, Lily, 3 years ago. The neighborhood reminded us of the kind of place you only see in commercials. Neatly trimmed lawns, families walking dogs in the evening, kids riding bikes without a worry. After years of crowded apartment living, this community felt like a breath of fresh air, a new beginning. Our house wasn't the biggest on the block, but it had a warm porch and a backyard big enough for Lily's dreams, a future garden, a swing, maybe even a little treehouse. I worked remotely as an IT consultant, and Emily taught at a nearby elementary school. We lived quietly, minded our own business, and paid our HOA dues like everyone else. For the first few months, life felt simple. Neighbors waved. The HOA sent polite newsletters about seasonal cleanups, and we honestly believed we had found a peaceful place to grow, but slowly, almost too subtly to notice, the tone started shifting. It began with small, harmless-looking reminders, a slip about our garbage bins being slightly visible from the street, a note asking us to trim a bush that had grown an inch over the boundary line. At the time, we brushed it off. Every neighborhood had rules, after all. But then came something strange. At a community meeting, the HOA president, a stern woman named Margaret Dixon, brought up a new yard appearance standard. She said it was to maintain community harmony, but her eyes lingered on us, specifically on me, in a way that didn't feel accidental. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I was overt thinking, but the feeling wouldn't go away. A few days later, while I was carrying groceries inside, I caught 2 neighbors whispering on the sidewalk. They glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Again, I tried to ignore it. But there was something building, something quiet, something unseen, tightening around us like a rope. And I had no idea a single notice taped to my door would be the spark that set everything on fire. The first official notice came on a Tuesday morning. Bright yellow paper, bold lettering, housing compliance violation. It claimed our exterior property was not in compliance with HOA landscaping standards, but that didn't make sense. I had just mowed the lawn 2 days before. I walked around the yard, searching for the issue. Nothing. No tall weeds, no debris, no overgrown bushes. Still, I followed proper procedure and emailed the HOA asking for clarification. I expected a simple explanation. Instead, the reply I received was sharp, cold, and dismissive. If you had read the guidelines, you would know the issue. Something was off, very off. The next week, another violation arrived. This time it said we had an unauthorized structure in our backyard. The only thing in our yard was Lily's small plastic slide, the kind parents buy for toddlers. Attempted to appeal, but the HOA told me the decision was final unless I attended a formal hearing. When I arrived at the meeting, the room felt heavy with tension. Margaret sat at the center of the long table, flanked by board members, who looked at me like I was already guilty. They didn't let me speak for more than 30 seconds. They didn't show any evidence. They didn't even look at the photos I brought, proving their accusations were false. The fines started. Then the warnings. Then the threats of a lien, and still, I didn't understand why this was happening. One evening, while I was dragging the trash bins back from the curb, my next-door neighbor, Tom, approached me. He looked nervous, glancing up and down the street like someone might be watching. "Daniel, look, I shouldn't be saying this," he whispered, "but you've made someone on the board angry." "What? How?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "You turned down a petition they were pushing last year about repainting mailboxes." Margaret didn't forget. That was it. A paint color petition? I laughed in disbelief. But Tom didn't laugh with me. It's personal now, he said quietly. They're watching you. From that day on, everything escalated. Neighbors who once waved now watched us with narrowed eyes. Cars slowed down when passing our house. We found a broken egg thrown at our driveway one morning. Someone left a note in our mailbox that said, "Follow the rules or leave." And then things got worse. One night, Lily woke up crying. She said she heard someone walking in our backyard. When I checked the security footage, I froze. A figure, tall, hooded, standing near our fence for almost 2 minutes. Not moving, just watching. I reported it to the TRA. They dismissed it as wildlife. The next morning, another notice appeared. This one claimed our porch. Light was too bright and violated lighting codes, a rule that didn't even exist in the handbook. Every time I tried to defend myself, the board pushed harder. Every time I complied, they found a new issue. It felt like drowning in slow motion. Then came the letter that pushed me to my limit, a final warning that if the violations continued, our property could be subjected to forced compliance action. In simple words, they could enter our property without permission. That night, Emily sat beside me as I reread the letter, again and again. "This isn't about rules anymore," she said softly. "Someone is targeting us." She was right, and I was being quiet. So I started documenting everything, every notice, every suspicious encounter, every neighbor who suddenly claimed to have seen something wrong with our home. I discovered inconsistencies in the HOAs, record keeping, missing forms, altered timestamps, fines issued without proper approval, and then the biggest discovery of all. Neighbor, Mrs. Carter, nervously approached us one afternoon and admitted she overheard an HOA board member saying they were going to make an example out of the Martins, us. They wanted to make an example out of us, but why? I wouldn't get that answer until the night of the community town hall, a meeting that would change everything. Showed up prepared, carrying months of evidence. But before I had the chance to speak, Margaret stood and accused me publicly of threatening members of the community and refusing to comply with repeated warnings. The room erupted in whispers. People stared. Some glared. My hands shook with anger. She was twisting the story, painting me as a danger. And the worst part? Some people were believing her. I stepped forward to respond. But before I could, a board member interrupted and said they had received multiple complaints from neighbors about our family. That was a lie. I knew it, but they said it confidently, with rehearsed conviction. It was a coordinated effort, a deliberate smear campaign, and everyone in that room could feel the tension thickening, tightening, pulling the community apart like a thread ready to snap. And as I looked out at the sea of faces, some supportive, some confused, some hostile, I realized this was no longer about violations. This was war, and the climax of this battle was coming fast. The night everything changed was the night I found an envelope shoved under our front door. No stamp, no sender. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line written in shaky handwriting. "You're not safe here. They're planning something for the next meeting." My heart pounded as I called Emily over. We read the note again and again, each time feeling the weight of those words sink deeper. Who sent it? What were they planning? And why did it feel like the walls were closing in on us? The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday evening. The rumors were already swirling that the board was preparing to vote on forcing us into mandatory compliance action, essentially giving them power to invade our property. I knew if I walked into that meeting unprepared, they would crush us, but something happened that flipped the entire story on its head. The morning of the meeting, our doorbell rang. I opened it to find Tom, nervous, pale, glancing over his shoulder. Without a word, he stepped inside and handed me a flash drive. "You didn't get this from me," he whispered, "but you need to see it before tonight." When he left, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. What I saw made my blood boil. Recordings, emails, screenshots, all between HOA board members. They were discussing ways to target us, ways to twist rules, ways to pressure neighbors into signing complaints, even discussing potential liens before violations were ever issued. And in one email, the worst one, Margaret had written, "We need to remove that family before they lower property values. Make sure the board is united." That was the moment I stopped being scared. That was the moment I got angry. When the sun set and the meeting began, the room was packed, more than I'd ever seen. Neighbors lined the walls, some curious, some tense, some whispering nervously. Margaret sat at the front table, smiling confidently, like she had already won. She called the meeting to order, then immediately launched into a speech about chronic violations and a homeowner who refused to follow community standards. Everyone turned their heads toward us. I stood up slowly, feeling every heartbeat echo in my chest. "Before you go any further," I said calmly, "I have something to share." Margaret stiffened. "You'll have your turn." "No," I cut in. "The community deserves to hear the truth right now." I placed a portable speaker on the podium, plugged in the flash drive, clicked play, and the room fell silent. First came audio recordings, board members privately discussing how to get rid of us. Then came the emails, projected onto the screen, showing falsified complaints, pre-planned fines, and explicit instructions to harass us into leaving. People gasped. Some shouted. One board member stormed out of the room. Margaret's face went white. This is taken out of context," she stammered, but the evidence kept rolling. Every lie, every scheme, every attempt to destroy our reputation. When it ended, the room buzzed with outrage. A man from the back stood and yelled, "You're abusing your power." Another woman shouted, "You lied to all of us!" For the first time, the community wasn't looking at us with suspicion. They were looking at her. Margaret tried desperately to regain control, slamming her gavel, demanding silence. But it was too late. The board voted unanimously to suspend her. Authority pending investigation. She was removed from her position right there in front of everyone. And then the head of the compliance committee stood, cleared his throat, and said, "I move that all violations and fines against the Martin family be dismissed." Immediately, the crowd erupted in applause. It was over. The war that tormented us for months ended in a single, explosive moment, and the truth finally exposed. But what came after? That was the real story. In the days following the meeting, the neighborhood felt different, lighter. People who had avoided us for months now waved again. Some even apologized for believing the lies. But rebuilding trust wasn't instant. The wounds caused by the HOA's corruption ran deep, not just in our family, but throughout the entire community. The board underwent a full restructuring. Members who had conspired behind closed doors resigned quietly, slipping away before the community could confront them. Others stayed and vowed to rebuild, transparency and fairness. But the most surprising part came from Margaret herself. A week later, she showed up at our doorstep, not in her signature blazer and heels, but wearing simple clothes and looking human. She apologized, not in a defensive way, not blaming stress, not making excuses. She admitted she let power go to her head, admitted her personal dislike of us had influenced her decisions, admitted she never expected things would spiral so far, or that the community would turn against her so swiftly. I didn't forgive her immediately. Some wounds take time, but hearing her say the words brought a strange sense of closure. Meanwhile, life at home began to settle. Emily finally slept through the night, without jolting awake at shadows or distant noises. Lily felt safe playing in the backyard again, and I felt the constant tension in my shoulders begin to release, slowly, but surely, yet there was still a lingering question in my mind. Why did none of the other board members stop her sooner? The truth, I learned, was simple and painfully human. Fear, complacency, the belief that someone else would speak up. Our story became a wake-up call, not just for Brookside Meadows, but for neighboring communities who heard about what happened. Residents began attending meetings more often, asking tougher questions, and demanding transparency. People realized something important. An HOA is only as fair as the people running it. One afternoon, a neighbor named Rachel approached me while I was working on our front garden. she said quietly. I'm glad you fought back. Because if this had happened to me, I don't know if I could have. Her words stuck with me. It made me realize how many families endure similar battles quietly alone, afraid of retaliation. Some move away. Some pay unfair fines. Some give up fighting. We didn't. And because of that, the entire neighborhood changed. Months later, under the newly elected board, the HOA handbook was revised. Outdated rules were removed, new checks were added to prevent abuse of power, and transparency became mandatory. No more backroom decisions, no more secret votes, and no more personal vendettas disguised as community standards. A year after the ordeal, Brookside Meadows didn't just look peaceful on the surface. It felt peaceful. We stayed in the home we once feared we'd lose. We rebuilt relationships. We regained our sense of safety. And the community rebuilt itself around fairness rather than control. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Emily watching the sunset, she said gently, "You know, I'm proud of us. We didn't let them push us out." I smiled, not the smile of relief we had worn in the early days, but a genuine one. "Yeah," I said quietly. "We stood our ground." And it mattered, because the truth is this. Most people assume HOA stories are about rules, fences, trash bins, and paint colors, but they're not. They're stories about power, about community, about standing up when something is wrong, even when your voice shakes, about refusing to let intimidation win, about choosing to fight for your home, not because it's a building, but because it's the place where your life happens. In the end, our home didn't just survive the conflict, we did, and we came out stronger. Not just as a family, but as a community that learned what happens when people finally say, enough.